Back on the Young Turks. Now we're going to talk to Glenn Greenwald of Salon.com. He's written two pieces that I want to talk about. One is on healthcare and one is on the Nobel Peace Prize speech of Barack Obama. Glenn, welcome back to the Young Turks.
Great to be back.
All right, let's start with healthcare. Your piece says White House as helpless victims on healthcare. Are you trying to tell me that the White House knows what they're doing here and that they're not at the mercy of Joe Lieberman? Is that your contention, Glenn?
I know it is shocking, the idea that the President of the United States actually exerts some degree of power in our political system, and that's especially true when his political party controls both houses of Congress, and when his chief of staff is someone, Rahm Emanuel, who built his career on figuring out how to get things done in Congress and twist arms and cajole and bully and threaten and manipulate people in Congress to do the things that he wants them to do. So, yeah, I think that the idea that Obama just sits back passively and waits for Congress to do whatever they choose to do and that he has no influence or power over the process is an obvious myth. Had he wanted there to be a public option or a Medicare buy-in or other progressive provisions in this bill, there are lots of things that he would have been doing to at least try to get them in there, and he's done none of them, leaving one, I think, with the only rational conclusion that he's happy with the bill as it turned out.
And we know that he could pressure senators because he pressured them to defeat Byron Dorgan's amendment that would have saved us $100 billion over the next 10 years. And it would have saved the deficit, by the way, in the budget, $19 billion as well, if we imported drugs from Canada. So he knows how to do it. He's obviously not doing it in the case of the public option or the Medicare buy-in, which, of course, leads to the question, Glenn, why? Well, why does he not want the public option?
Well, I think that, one of the things that has been absolutely clear from the very start of this healthcare process early on back in January and February is that the number one goal that the administration had was to make sure that both the pharmaceutical and the healthcare industries stayed happy with what it was that they were doing, or at least didn't become alienated by what they thought would be the final outcome. And keeping those industries happy had a number of benefits, one of which is that they didn't go and spend huge amounts of money to try and campaign against the bill and advertise against it and sink it the way they did in 1993 with the healthcare proposal of the Clinton administration. But also, I think it's very important to realize that one of the ways the Democrats have built their power over the last several years, and this is true in the 90s as well, is that they get much more corporate donations than the Republicans do. That's obviously true of the financial industry. It's particularly true of the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry. And so if the White House had done something that was truly threatening to these industries, like drug reimportation or bulk negotiation for bulk prices, all things that the Obama, the candidate, said he favored, or had they actually introduced a public option to compete with the health insurance industry and keep it honest, I think that they would have become alienated and angry. And instead, what the White House did was secretly negotiate all year long with both industries inside the White House, which also violated Obama's campaign pledge, and the bill that ended up first being introduced under the name of Max Baucus, and now is the final bill, or we're close to the final bill, is the byproduct of the White House's negotiation with these industries because they were desperate to keep these industries happy.
So, Glenn, if they wanted this all along, is it possible that they were right, that they don't have bad intentions? They think you and I are naive and don't know how to get things done, that if they hadn't made these deals, the pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare insurance companies and all of them would have ripped it apart like happened in 1994 and 93, and that we wouldn't have gotten a bill. Is there validity to that argument?
Well, there may be. I don't know. We didn't see what happened. Remember that this is a president who came in with a great deal of popularity. He had a great deal of trust, not just from the Democratic Party, but from the country as a whole. There is a sense on the entire political spectrum that it doesn't matter if you're conservative or a liberal or anything in between, many people believe that our political process has been annexed by corporate interests and their lobbyists. He made clear from the start that his intention was not to allow the pharmaceutical and the health insurance industry to essentially dominate the process and dictate the outcome of the bill. I think that things would have looked much, much different now. Remember, you can go back and try and figure out what Barack Obama campaigned on. And it's very hard to do because it was a good campaign, and therefore it was vague enough that you could basically read into it whatever it is that you wanted. There were very few specifics about what he intended to do. But one of the concrete, tangible issues on which he absolutely ran was that he was going to change the way that Washington worked, in the sense that lobbyists and corporations would no longer be able to dictate the outcome of bills, that things would not be negotiated in secret, and specifically with healthcare, he promised that all negotiations would be on C-SPAN so the American people could see whose interests were being served and who was doing the serving. And had he actually adhered to those interests and actually sounded those themes that he ran on for 2 years and won in a resounding victory, I think that the outcome of the election would have been much different. If all he was going to do was going to construct a bill that was going to be pleasing to the health insurance or the pharmaceutical industry, we could have had any president who would have done that. That's what Washington has been doing for decades now. So, I think the expectations were reasonable that he would certainly at least try to do something different. If they were going to take that cynical strategy that you've just articulated, which may or may not be reasonable, then I think it's essentially the exact opposite of what people thought they were getting with Barack Obama.
Now, I want to move on to the Nobel speech, but I'm going to conclude by saying, look, what's arguable is whether they had the right strategy, that they really needed to keep those companies from attacking the bill. And what's arguable is whether this bill will work in the long run or not. And you can have legitimate opinions on both sides. What's not arguable is what Glenn was just talking about, which is that he didn't try. He didn't try to take on these guys. He didn't try to take on the system. He gave us a little change on the status quo. And so if people are disappointed by that, it makes all the sense in the world. Now, Glenn, you were also disappointed in the Nobel speech. But some liberals and some conservatives seem to like it a lot, and some moderates too, because I fancy myself a moderate in foreign policy, and I like the speech. So first, tell us why there's some dichotomy there as to why everybody liked the speech. How could they all like it?
Right. Well, it wasn't so much that I disliked the speech, in part because I am essentially not that interested any longer in assessing Barack Obama's speeches. I think he delivers really good speeches. He delivers them well. They're well written. It's one of his strong points. I'm much more interested in whether his actions adhere to his speeches. The other aspect of the speech that makes me reluctant to form any kind of an emphatic opinion about whether I liked it or didn't like it was that, the hallmark of a good politician is, and Barack Obama is nothing if not a good politician, is that he pays homage to all different conflicting ideas, so that if you are listening to the speech, you can hear in it whatever it is you want to hear in it, and ignore the rest. And so you could pick out parts of the speech where he sounded like Gandhi preaching nonviolence, and you could pick out parts of the speech where he sounded like George Bush in the first term talking about the American mission being to combat evil, a very weighted and pointed word to use in the context of talking about war. And so I think it was difficult to really wrap your fingers around what it was that he was saying exactly, because a lot of it was inconsistent and ambiguous. What I was interested in was the fact that there were most neoconservatives, not just conservatives, but neoconservatives, who have been harshly critical of the president for basically from day one, especially on foreign policy, were not just content with the speech, but extremely enthusiastic about it, believing that it affirmed their basic precepts of foreign policy, and yet progressives and as you say, moderates, also were very happy with the speech, and I found that odd and was wondering how that could be.
Now, Glenn, I agree with the part where you say, look, he has an amazing ability to do these speeches where everybody comes out of the room thinking, oh, he's on my side, when that's not necessarily the case. But the reason that I think a lot of people liked it in this case is because when you actually read it, it actually was a moderate speech. And what I mean by that is he says, look, there's a time for war, there's a time for peace. The time for war is not always like John Bolton and the neocons think. There was a lot of implicit attacking of the Iraq war, although he didn't explicitly say it. And he's, goes with the philosophy that he outlined. He's not against all wars, he's just against dumb wars. So when you look at it that way, couldn't you say that the speech was fairly consistent?
Well, I think that one of the things that first of all, there's a tonal aspect to it, which is everyone understands already that Barack Obama believes that there's such a thing as a good war. And the reason we all understand that is because he's twice now ordered an escalation of the war being fought in Afghanistan. So nobody needs to have it explained to them that Barack Obama considers war to be a good thing, or that the United States believes that wars are just. Everybody in the world already knows that. That's evident and that's apparent. This is a prize that's supposed to be devoted not toward figuring out what the most perfectly calibrated foreign policy is, or how the United States goes about legitimately protecting its interest in the world, or what is and is not a just war. This is supposed to be a prize devoted to the cause of peace. And so, if you're going to go to West Point or give a foreign policy address before a domestic audience, as the president, I can understand explicating what your views are and when war is appropriate and when it isn't. But to go into a ceremony, into a prize that is sort of the pinnacle of a celebration of peace, and spend half of the time justifying and to some extent singing the praises of war, not just the war that you're escalating, but war as a concept, I thought was really quite excessive. There's lots of places he could have done that. Now, I said at the time that, to be fair to him, he was put in the odd position of being given the Nobel Peace Prize as a president fighting two wars, one of which he's escalated, as a few weeks ago, and so he had to address it. He couldn't ignore it, and addressing it, he's going to defend what it is that he said, but there were some parts of it that were very muscular and robust defense of war, I thought, far more than was necessary to justify what he was doing in Afghanistan.
Now, I totally understand your point, and it goes to what Kucinich said afterwards, that if you justify that war is actually peace, after a while that has terrible effects. So that was a cause of concern for me in the speech. But overall, I think that it was the right venue because he has to explain what he thinks is peace and what will lead to not just short-term but long-term peace. But I think all your points are certainly interesting and worth noting, and I love how the neocons and the liberals, I think, misinterpreted it, because it was, in my estimation, a speech that was right down the middle and not at either one of those positions. And that's part of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there are parts of it that if you're a neocon were actually clearly repudiating and renouncing large parts of what they actually believe that they decided to ignore and pretend wasn't there. So I agree, it was a calibrated and balanced speech. I think that, to the extent one wants to criticize it, that could be the criticism.
There you go. Glenn Greenwald's from Salon.com, and these days everybody's reading his articles, so check it out there. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right, we'll be right back.